Hello and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Michael Evans. Hey, Michael, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Michael Evans is the co-founder and CEO of Ream, the subscription platform by fiction authors for fiction authors, a sci-fi thriller author of a dozen novels, and a rising senior at Harvard. And I became aware of Michael and Ream from Jane Friedman's email newsletter, The Hot Sheet, where Jane wrote, Ream, a new subscription platform for authors, just opened up to all authors earlier this month, and that was in May 2023. It's kind of like a cross between Patreon and Wattpad or Vella, where you can serialize your work for paying readers on your own terms and schedule. And so I invited Michael on the podcast to talk about Ream and the creator economy and the future of publishing. And so, Michael, whenever I have these kinds of conversations, I always like to start out asking my guest, what did you see in the writing or the publishing worlds that made you feel like the time was right for a solution, like in your case, Ream?
Well, that's a long story that I'll try and condense because I feel like I had been in the publishing world for years and years. And so for me, I had been publishing since probably when I was turned 15. I was really serious about self-publishing. I actually listening to Joanna Penn's podcast had really gotten into like, okay, like this is possible. And I'd been writing books, started off as like fan fiction when I was very young, but then I kind of graduated into original fiction as many writers do, but not with the intention of doing anything like with publishing it, right? But when I figured out that it was possible and that I could kind of run my own business and be an indie author, to me, that was like the most exciting thing in the world. And for the next 3 years, I published 12 books and spent a lot of money in Amazon ads and Facebook ads. It was a very like low margin, high stress game for me. And when I got to the end of that, I felt burnt out and I felt like I couldn't be an author, which was sad because that was really my dream. And I pivoted to YouTube. And from YouTube, I was able to get into live streaming, and I live streamed for a Sean Parker startup called Airtime. And after spending like a year creating like literally, I think hundreds of hours of video content that were published online in live streams and easily spending thousands of hours doing video, I had gotten a lot of insights about the broader view of the creator economy and how YouTubers and live streamers were building community. And I felt like in many ways that the publishing space didn't have the same tools that these creators had available to them. And when I was in college, meeting a lot of my friends who were studying engineering, it became obvious to me that we could build tools for creative people and build tools that could help people like have a better experience online. And for me, I had faced so much problems with my mental health in terms of like how existing systems optimized for retention and were really, really focused on like, okay, metrics, which I love, right? But for me, that was an addictive cycle. And I wanted to have something that could help ground me and have a sort of space where I could connect with my fans and build a deeper relationship with them, where I could sell directly to my fans and have their emails, right? So I saw this kind of wave coming where this publishing world that we lived in was shifting more towards this future where authors are going to have smaller niche communities, vertical social media platforms where fans could communicate, experience stories, and also support authors in different, more interesting ways all in one place. And I think we've seen that analogy with other industries moving towards this podcasting. And I just knew there was something there to be built because it felt like the big traditional retailers weren't solving the problem. And it felt like although there was a lot of great SaaS tools that indie authors could use, like one of those things was never going to solve the problem of like having a home to connect with my fans. So that's when I just got obsessed about meeting people in the space. But I honestly didn't know where to start because I had this big vision of what I wanted publishing to look like, really where authors got to run their own bookstores instead of authors being on a big bookstore, right? That was kind of the big overarching vision. But when I met Amelia Rose, who's my co-founder, that's when it all came together. I was like, oh, we should work on this. She was and still is, it makes 6 figures a year as a subscription author. And she was doing well on a platform called Patreon, which is the best analogy for Ream. Ream's like the fiction version of Patreon, where we're like subscription platform for fiction authors, right? So she was doing well on Patreon. And I'm like, well, you have a community there, right? You have them paying you in this very interesting economic model where like 2,000 fans are able to support you, paying you $5 to as much as $50 a month, and you're making 6 figures a year from that. That to me was like really interesting. But she had talked about how, you can't really read books on the platform. You have to make individual posts. It's very tough to schedule out her stories. And all the sort of management features and reader experience weren't actually optimized for reading. They were optimized for all these other things that Patreon was focused on, video creators, podcasters. So I was like, oh, this is a very manageable thing that we can like actually do. Like we can make a better version of this for authors and basically help you, Amelia. You're running an incredible business with subscriptions. How can we make your business better? Hopefully help you save more time, help you make more money from this and give your readers a better experience. So that was like what we started with. And it was very like achievable that we could launch something like that. And a year later we did, and it's been a lot of fun. So that was kind of like what it started with. There was this big vision that I was passionate about. I faced this problem that these existing publishing platforms did not really allow me to have control of my career as an indie author, allow me to build a community of my fans. And it felt like I was always at the whim of an algorithm, always at the whim of, this sales ranking and didn't have the ability to be like, no, these are my fans. I have their emails. This is my business, right? That I'm running. And then that was the vision. And then the key problem that we started with was like, okay, well, it sounds great to build this future publishing platform focused on the creator economy, but you can't just do that overnight. So let's start with something that is really interesting, a niche within this whole space that we can really like knock out of the park, and something that we both are passionate about because it marries the whole idea of community and focusing on your existing fans with the business model, which is that you have to have fans continue to pay you month over month for subscriptions to work, which I found super interesting because like that's what community is all about, serving those people that are already there for you rather than trying to constantly feel like you're on a treadmill to find new fans. Although that's important, right? It's having more of a balance and subscriptions give authors that. So yeah, that's the honestly the short story of what got me into it, even though that wasn't short.
Well, I have all sorts of questions based on that. One of which is that you've mentioned community a couple of times, and I think that that's sort of, the byword of the author community these days. But I think the idea of coming at it with a background in video is sort of different. And I don't think that video is a big part of the Ream platform yet. Is that correct? And can you speak to that and what your long-term vision might be of using video as a community creator?
Yeah, so it's not part of the platform now, and I don't think it's part of our medium-term vision. I would definitely be happy to experiment with more, like, bringing readers together in more book club environments where they could, experience video on the platform. Some authors will use, like, external Zoom links, but for me, it was more seeing, like, who the average video creator is about 15 to 20 years younger than the average author right now. Like, the average video creator is maybe 30, and honestly, they're probably 20 to 25. The average author is just of a different generation, which is awesome, right? The average reader is older, but seeing what this new generation was doing in terms of how they're running their online business and how they're building their community, it was like, wait, like the authors aren't selling merch like YouTubers are. Like YouTubers are making a ton of their money from merch. They have memberships, they have Discord groups. They're like, you know, really focused on running a business where YouTube AdSense is only a piece of it, right? And that is what they get when people view their videos. YouTube AdSense is like their version of like KU page reads, right? Like that's what they're getting paid per view. And since YouTube AdSense never really supplemented authors' income like KU could, at least at that level, they always had to find other options. Like to make a living off of YouTube AdSense, still to this day, you have to be getting millions and millions of views a month. So they had to get scrappy and experiment with other ways of making a living. With authors, frankly, our industry didn't get decimated quite as bad as music, quite as bad as video with this internet revolution. We were able to, I mean, in terms of the royalty rate, right? Like we still were able to, book sales persevered. KU, did pay out an amount per page read that enabled authors. You still had to reach quite a scale to get a living, but it wasn't unbelievable, impossible scale. So we had a lot of authors be able to make a living just off of, again, like their core IP. But the problem with that is that it's totally changing. Like KU now, Joe Solari published an article where it's like, oh, if you're getting the same amount of page reads today as you were in 2015 in KU, you're effectively with inflation getting paid 33% less. That's a big hit. Okay, so are there 33% more readers in the world since 2015? Debatable. I think there many markets have grown that much, but for some authors who haven't been able to constantly grow, the question becomes like, how can you increase the lifetime value of your reader? And that isn't just from like charging them more. It's like, how do I provide a more immersive experience that gives them more value? And these YouTubers had nailed the model. Like now these YouTubers are building like the business of tomorrow. Was with my friends in Detroit a year and a half ago, right when Ream was starting. And the guy I was talking to had 15 million TikTok followers and was creating his own ice cream shop in New York City. It's called Catch an Ice Cream with Dylan LeMay. And I'm like, what? Like the amount of influence he has. But then I was thinking about it, like authors, the indie authors I know who have like 100,000 people on their mailing list, or even 10,000 people, like they have influence. They have an audience who trusts them. The biggest currency that like these TikTokers and YouTubers can't get, which is someone who can stick with them for hours and hours on end. Like that's what they're all fighting for. And these authors are doing it because they're creating incredible stories. Why is there not a way that we can evolve our businesses, do what these YouTubers are doing in terms of being able to provide, again, like membership experiences, be able to provide merch, other types of businesses. So I think like the vision of Ream is much more helping authors build their mini Disneys, right? And Disney makes a third of their revenue from their actual media. Like the other two-thirds come from amusement parks and merchandise. And like authors don't have a mini Disney at all unless you're like, I don't know, Harry Potter. But like how do you make that more accessible with the tools and software and technology of the creator economy where anyone, even if you don't have a million fans, can spin up a business that helps you increase your revenue and give more value to your fans. Like that's the ultimate vision of Ream. It's not like, oh, you lose out in the book sales and ditch it all to subscriptions. It's saying like, no, you can provide a membership experience to your readers that adds an additional layer of value on top of what you're already doing without spending a ton of extra work because that core IP is the center of all of it. But again, by providing fans like on our platform, authors provide fans early access. They write some bonus scenes, think like behind the scenes cuts. They send them sometimes book boxes at higher tier prices. They might do things like a Zoom where they get to meet the author and get to meet other readers. That is like the additional layer of value where it's like, okay, you're spending maybe ideally 5 to 10% more of your time servicing this, but you can make like 30 to 40% more income in your business. That's our ultimate goal and what we try and teach authors to do. And I think it can go in any direction the authors want. Like whatever we see authors in terms of building their mini Disney, that's where we want to go. We want to help them service the experiences that their readers want the most. And just nowhere has had a laser focus on how do we give those experiences to readers and how do we help authors create those experiences. Really nowhere's done that focused on this segment of people, which is why, I mean, I love authors. I've been in this community for a long time. It's why I light up talking about it.
Well, let's go back to a much more basic question to sort of understand where Ream is coming from now. And that is that I've seen alternatively that Ream is currently either attracting or is pitching genre fiction authors. And I also saw reference that it's good for material that's maybe more difficult to get out on other platforms like steamy romance, for example.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about where Ream is today so we can understand the context of some of the things you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, where Ream is today is it's a place to be able to publish stories and be able to have a sort of like Facebook group like feed slash community with your fans all in one place. So actually Jane Friedman saying like it's kind of like Patreon meets Wattpad, maybe meets like a Facebook group type of thing is very accurate. That's basically what we are today. And we function very much like setting up almost your own site as an author, meaning like we're not at this very moment a discovery platform where you're going to go on and find a bunch of new authors. We're optimized for connecting you to your existing fan base, which means that a lot of times authors are, setting up their Ream and then promoting it to their audience. And what they're doing with this then is having this page where they can set up tiers where readers can pay them like different amounts per month based on what the author wants to give them. And then inside of our platform, we make it easy to publish those stories. Maybe it's through early access. Maybe you're giving them access to your backlist. Maybe you're giving them access to bonus content and having that inside the platform. In terms of like the authors using Ream successfully, romance is our biggest genre. It's also just the biggest genre in general in books. And my co-founder is a steamy romance author. So we just have a special connection to that community and those authors. And also really realize that community and the kind of ravenous ability to want to be more immersed in these worlds and to want to support those authors more is just there's an especially large group in that genre. So for us, it's like supporting those authors is really fun. But we've seen authors from thriller to sci-fi to historical fiction set up on Ream and also gain paid subscribers. So that's kind of like where Ream's at today. It's very similar to like you get all the emails of your paid subscribers. You get full control over pricing. What we do as Ream is we take a 10% fee of the revenue you make plus payment processing. Very similar business model to Patreon. So for us, like we just want to help you grow. And it's very similar to like setting up a very streamlined Shopify in a sense, because you have a space where you can sell directly to your fans and customize it like your own site, but you're not actually paying to set up your own site. or paying out of pocket each month, like Shopify, in terms of like whether you make money or not, you're paying out of pocket on Shopify. Of course, for authors who are doing really well on Ream, that 10%, you know, we take, and our goal is just to keep making more for them and having the core feature that I think is really cool for the readers on Ream is having the social reader that we have. So when you're inside Ream, you can comment on the stories that you're reading, right? You can comment on each paragraph, and then the author can respond to those comments if they choose to, and it makes it like this immersive social reading experience. And then as an author, you can schedule out those chapters very easily so that if you're writing serialized fiction, or even if not, you're just trying to, one by one, since it's a monthly subscription, give things to your fans, you can do so very easily. So that's where we're at today. And I think we have a lot of the core just experiences that readers are looking for and authors are looking for in terms of like making all these things possible.
You had mentioned email as something that authors own, the emails of their subscribers if they're using Ream. And emails lists is always one of the first things that people are told to develop as they're starting their author careers. But I also think that sometimes it feels overwhelming because one has to offer bonuses to attract people to the email list. And sometimes those bonuses are things that also sound like the kind of thing one could put up on a platform like Ream. So deleted scenes or serialized spin-off stories based on their novels or something like that. How do you recommend people balance sharing content with platform subscribers versus email newsletter subscribers? Like, how do you not get overwhelmed by having to create all this extra content to keep both those contingents of people happy?
I would think about it all like members. They're all members of your worlds, members of your community. And you have some members that are paying you each month, and you might have some members who are, we'll say, free members, members who are, on your mailing list and not paying on a subscription platform. So if you think about it all in the context of membership, you just need to kind of delineate like which levels of access do specific members get. And when you think about free members, you don't want to give them nothing, meaning like you don't want to ignore them, right? You want to at least give them like, hey, a new book's coming out. Here's a little tease that new book, right? Those are important things. So you don't want to ignore any sort of member because one, not every member can afford to be a paying member. And that's important and important to recognize that and try and create inclusive experiences. But then also, even more important, there's a lot of free members who might one day become paid members. So for your business as an author, it's important to pay attention to both. But how do you delineate that? The best thing that I've seen authors do and what is most successful on Ream is this concept of early access, which to give like a very short, but also I think helpful example, early access is when you get to read either some chapters of a book, a short story, an entire novel before other readers do. And typically they're giving early access out based off of paid membership tiers. So maybe readers at the $5 tier in your subscription get access to your story 4 to 8 weeks before it comes out on retailers or before you publish it on serial fiction platforms for free or something like that, right? Depends on your model, depends on who's listening and how they published already. Maybe people who are paying $10 a month get access 3 months early or 4 months early, right? Even earlier access. And then those free members would still get access to that story on the normal schedule as everyone else. So you're not ignoring them. So that's one way that authors repurpose like their core intellectual property that they're already developing to monetize on Ream. And that's the way that we encourage authors to start off because the one key thing about subscriptions is that you don't need to launch the perfect subscription. How can you launch and get your first paid subscriber? And then from there, take their feedback in and add more things or tweak around what you're doing to fit them. So the idea is not to have like 10 million things you're providing on day one and to overwhelm yourself when you're not getting paid for it. It's how can I get my first paid subscriber? And there's another psychology behind this too, which is that the ebook retailers, which are very important. You can find new readers on ebook retailers, their acquisition channels. So I'm not at all saying to abandon them because, like I said, Ream is designed to help connect you with your existing readers. So that's important to know what each platform serves. But the important thing here is that everyone pays the same on an ebook retailer. That is both a strength and a weakness. The strength is that it makes it super easy from a discovery perspective, right? They cap prices at $9.99. New readers and readers who have read every one of your books and love you all pay the same. So it makes it very easy for someone to come in who's new. That's valuable. The downside is that to someone who really, really loves your work and really wants to support you, they have no ability to do that. So sometimes we see that just opening up a place just for people to support you actually makes a huge difference and actually has a certain portion of your fans. And we're not talking half of your fans, mind you. When I say fans, it's a very nebulous word. There's different ways to define it, but we could take, half of your email list. If you have a free reading email list, half of your email list probably won't magically be like, "Oh, I wanna support you $5 a month just because." But what if 2 to 5% do? That's significant. We see that. What if even 1% do? That adds up, right? Especially if it's just focused on something that's sustainable for you. So that's the key thing, right? You have to make something sustainable for you. And the biggest thing to think about is divorcing value from quantity of output because we oftentimes think about, okay, one book's worth $5. There's these pricing things that we think, oh, well, one book's worth this much. But it's like, well, no, not necessarily. In a discovery platform, when you're trying to optimize for a cold audience coming in and getting new readers, sure, that's the willingness to pay for a new story. But for your fans who already are into your work and want to support you, there's a much greater willingness to pay. Obviously, that willingness depends on ability, but this is why you have different tiers. You can have a $100 tier that has nothing but support. I told an author to do this on Ream. They were moving from Patreon to Ream, and they had 8 subscribers on Patreon. I said, "Hey, look, just set up a $100 tier. Trust me, I don't know if anyone will join it, but you're not going to do anything extra for them. You're just going to say it's for support. You're not forcing them to join it." And that sounds crazy when I say that, but someone joined at a $100 tier, and they were just off of one person making more than they were on Patreon. So there's these type of things that's like, oh, okay, there's an opportunity here to tap into an additional revenue stream that I'm not already doing now. But the key is making it sustainable, right? So that's what we focus on helping and telling our authors is like, hey, don't do a ton of things that you're not already doing unless you're excited about it. Don't go off and make 5 different tiers when you're just starting your subscription. And also bake your expectations for your subscription in with where your current business is. Like if you're just starting as an author, starting a subscription isn't going to get you to the moon. It's just not. And that's important to know. Like this is like funny, I run a subscription platform. This isn't the next thing to like try and jive into because this is the next up and coming market. Like yes, in many ways there's opportunity in subscriptions, but who is the opportunity for? It's for authors who've already built trust with their readers and already built a relationship with their readers. And I'm not saying like one-on-one, I'm saying through their stories, right? So we have to remember where subscriptions sit in the reader journey. And then for many authors, they have readers who are there and ready, but they've never created any sort of experience or product that can actually like capitalize on that stage of the reader journey, which that's what I guess hopefully I'm encouraging people listening to think about.
Just a quick break from the interview. Are you getting value from the podcast? Please consider supporting it and all the work I do at the Indy Author by becoming a patron. To pledge a monthly contribution, go to patreon.com/the Indy Author, or to make an occasional contribution, perhaps to indicate the value that a specific episode or resource provided to you on your creative voyage, scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. And now, back to the interview. So, is most of the content that's being shared on Ream either short stories or serialized content of a longer work, or are people also sharing longer works like novel-length works there?
It depends. I'd say like it we have both and it's a very even actually split because a lot of our authors, our top authors are kind of giving early access their stories on Ream, but a lot of times they're rolling out those stories onto traditional like retail platforms like Amazon, Kobo, whether they're, depending on if they're wide or KU, we have both. So a lot of times what they're doing from a production schedule standpoint, let's say you have a book scheduled to release, we're in July now, so 6 months from now, January 1st of this upcoming year. What they would do is say, okay, so I'm writing this book now. It's going to go off to my editor by maybe, October, hopefully. It depends on how long that all takes, but we'll just use this example. So over the next 90 days, I'm going to be writing this book. What they'll do then is say, okay, I'm going to target writing maybe 3 chapters a week. This is totally hypothetical, by the way. If 3 chapters a week sounds a lot to you, I've seen authors be successful writing 1 chapter a month, but we're going to use this example. So they're writing 3 chapters a week. They're actually writing and giving their fans the first draft in early access. They're actually giving them the first draft of the book. So for the fan, it's like this exclusive early look at the book as it's being formed. And they're getting that book as the author's writing it. Now, I say that as they're writing it. Some authors will schedule ahead by a few weeks or even a few months to for their own sanity, which I support. It depends on your workflow and how you want to schedule it out. But that's what I see being the most common way authors are making money, like giving their readers early access to their books before it comes out on a retailer. And oftentimes they're getting a view into that book earlier in the production process, meaning they're not getting the finalized edited ebook. And what we see oftentimes is that readers will read this first draft early access book and one, provide feedback that helps the author, which is huge. It's kind of taking like beta reading to a new level, if you think about it, because it's like they're there along the journey. They can comment inside of the book on Ream and they're supporting you throughout the whole journey. But then the next step is when the book actually comes out, authors will do one of two things. Some authors just say, hey, it's out. You can go buy it if you want. Some authors will send them, the people who had early access, the finalized ebook copy through the tool like Story Origin or Book Funnel. But what's interesting is that we've seen with my co-founder, like her readers, even when she sends them the ebook copy, still go out and buy it on a retailer to support and basically review her work. So the biggest thing to know is like this is a small portion of your fans compared to your overall portion. Like this super fan, you know, want to support you sector of it, but it's not insignificant. And it's a portion of your fans that could like really help you out and not only make your stories better, which is really key, but also support you in a way that just isn't possible elsewhere. So that's what I see being the most common thing. And I see authors both from serialized fiction backgrounds and who normally write novels who are instead like serializing their early access. So that's what we see being most common. I haven't actually seen many successful short story writers yet on Ream, but mind you, we did just launch 45 days ago. So that's just being transparent about like what I've seen on the platform now. I definitely don't think that's impossible to see in the future. I think subscriptions are a good way to monetize short stories. We do see more bonus content though, which I guess you could consider short stories, but like a lot of it isn't. Like a lot of it's like character profiles or like I'm going to write this sort of like world building background. It depends on the genre, but a lot of times we see different or novelette or novella length works. Like an author's really inspired to write something that's maybe 15,000 words long, not really optimized for sales in a retailer, not really optimized for, doing well in a sort of like KU or Audible program. So what are they doing? They're taking that content and making it exclusive to subscribers. So that's another successful model we see. And I kind of bucket it broadly under bonus content. So yeah, it's a lot. I know there's just a lot going on.
Well, I had originally asked about the length of the works because what I was wondering about is the difference between providing early access on a platform like Ream or providing access initially on a direct platform like Shopify or Payhip or something like that. But now I can see that you could do both. You can do the serialized, like, here's my draft first chapter. You can send out all those chapters to your subscribers. Then you could offer the completed work on a direct sales platform. And then you could
Yes.
offer the completed work on all the traditional retail sites.
And we see authors do this all the time. It's like the world of all the ants. Like they'll roll it out to the subscribers first, then they'll package it up. And sometimes we see even to Kickstarter, right? Another crowdfunding vehicle being like, okay, now the book's ready. We're gonna launch special editions on Kickstarter. And then we're gonna roll it out to the retailers after the Kickstarter. Or, you could do PayHip as well and Shopify. So it's funny, like there's so many uh, it subscriptions are like exactly the kind of thing where it's like whatever your existing sort of release model is, there's a way to fit subscriptions into it that is sustainable for you. Now, I'm not saying every author should have a subscription. I do not believe that. But if this excites you, there's a way to make it work for you.
The mention of Kickstarter makes me think about the aspect of the stress of a scheduled kind of production schedule.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people, and I would count myself among them, say, I'm never going to do a Kickstarter because that idea of having that schedule that you have to meet, not only logistically and production wise, but creatively, would not be helpful for me. Do you see authors encountering that when they enter into a subscription relationship with their followers? And if so, how do you advise them about that? Or are there people who just shouldn't go into it for that reason?
No, it's a fantastic question. And I think that's definitely one of the challenges of subscriptions. It really is. And I think the biggest thing is when we look at other authors and what they're doing, and this goes for anything in publishing, right? This is kind of more broad advice, but I'll narrow it down to subscriptions. We want to really realize what path works for us, what excites us, what is sustainable for us, what works for us and our readers or our future readers, rather than doing something because we see author X doing it and they're successful, right? So it's all about like providing context and self reflection to everything we do. So now when we take that to subscriptions, if you go on to a platform like Ream and look at some authors, or actually on our site, subscriptions for authors, we have it's subscriptionsforauthors.com. We have like 500 authors that do well in subscriptions just in a spreadsheet across all different platforms, not just Ream, because there's other platforms and We want to support you wherever you are at. There are a lot of different people offering a lot of different things. And you could walk away when you look at all 500 and be like, oof, I'm stressed out, but you'll probably look at a few in your genre, just knowing what I've done and knowing talking to other authors. You'll look at a few in your genre that are doing well, and you'll be like, yes, I should do what they're doing, right? I guess I should. And then some of them, right? Like, especially because I'm going to assume just because anything in writing, there's probably some full-time writers listening to this. Probably the most of us listening to this still have a day job. I'm still in school right now doing Ream. So like I'm with you. I feel that struggle. When you see authors at the top, right? Especially in subscriptions, they probably had their subscription for a few years and they're more than likely to be full-time, especially if they have like 1,000 paid subscribers a month. Like that's at a level where like most people, depending on their financial situation, et cetera, can consider full-time. What a full-time subscription author with 1,000 fans can provide versus you, someone who's just getting started, totally different world. And that's not a bad thing because like I said, you want to focus on getting your first subscriber. So the biggest thing I see authors do is they map out where they want to be in 5 years, which is important to visualize, and then try and start doing all of those things today. And then you burn out very quickly. So my advice to subscriptions is to start small so that you can be sustainable because the biggest thing, like Kickstarters are based around the launch. So you want a big launch. With a Kickstarter, you want to launch and launch proportionally with all the different goodies and things like the successful Kickstarters, right? And the authors who've been doing Kickstarter for a couple of years because that is the model. It's all based around that launch. It's all in or nothing. But with subscriptions, it's like, no, 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 month by month, you've got a new
Yeah.
opportunity to get more fans. So I think once we get out of that launch mindset and get back into like, well, what can we do tomorrow? It changes the conversation. And that's just my biggest advice to people like start small and start small again. But the other thing too is don't be afraid to take breaks. You can pause your subscription if something comes up in your life and you don't want to charge your fans for a period of time, but you also don't want to lose them. Like you don't want to cancel their subscriptions. So you can pause them. That's huge because then you don't have to like abandon your subscription forever, but you don't have to charge your fans for a period where you might feel uncomfortable doing so. I also recommend taking time off. If you promise your fans a chapter a week or a bonus chapter or short story a month, whatever your promise is to your fans, one, you want to under promise and over deliver. But two, sometimes when life comes up and we can't deliver, just communicate that with your fans. I see this all the time with authors, and they're very understanding. I mean, if you continually and always can't fulfill your promises, right? Then it's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. But like you can push back a release date, like both on a retailer, Amazon sometimes gets pissed off, but you certainly can on your own subscription platform. So just don't feel like the subscription platform owns you. You own the subscription platform. You own your relationship with your readers, and you can change that relationship over time. And that is, I think, the biggest freedom is like I'm not committing to this forever. I'm committing to this for this month, and then next month I'm committing to something else. And that's how it goes.
I wanted to loop back on the comment you had made about advising the Ream author to have a $100 membership level and match that up with your suggestion that people should not try to launch and achieve what is more appropriate to a vision for 5 years out. Can you just describe a little bit the mindset you were encouraging that person to take when you advised them to have a $100 membership option?
I'm advising them that there's some reader out there, maybe potentially, who just wants to support you at that level, period. They're not giving them anything for $100 in that specific situation. They're
Mhm.
not like, bending over backwards, having a call with them, nothing. I just said to them, okay, the biggest thing when we price our subscriptions, which is a good thing to talk about, is like, well, how much is our work worth? And it's so difficult to know as an author. Like, what is our work? What do we value ourselves as? And most authors severely undervalue themselves, right? And this is because society tells us this that every book's worth half a penny per page read or whatever it is, right? And in reality, like storytellers for the world, that's our motto. But like truly, like the stories make us who we are. They make our communities. They make our society. So if something's this highly valued, then like the tough part too is that we live in a capitalist society where making money is somewhat of a necessity, and sometimes, like, putting a dollar in art, like, there's a conflict there that, like, we have to kind of marry with, again, if we especially wanna make money from our writing, but it's not like a one-to-one relationship in terms of, like, "Oh, well, this reader got this specific emotion, and we can target, like, this." No, it doesn't work like that, we all know that. So how do we price our subscription then? Because this is the question, because on retailers, it's like, "Oh, well, there already is this sort of convention around pricing," and if you're gonna take that same mindset and then bring it to subscriptions, then you're just gonna be putting a ton more work on yourself. Like, if you're giving your readers, like, you know, 3 books a year and they're paying $5 in a retailer for it, and then someone's paying $5 a month to get early access to 3 books, a year on your subscription, they're paying 4 times more. So if you took that same quantity mindset, you'd be like, I have to now publish 12 books a year. So what do I recommend authors do? I recommend authors price at multiple tiers when they're starting off with the same benefits. The interesting thing about subscription and the tier level is that you're not forcing someone to join a particular tier, right? It's just an option. So when you say you have an option to support my work at the $5 level and you get this, or you can support my work at the $25 level and you might not get anything more, but thank you, because maybe that's what you value it at. Or you can support my work at the $100 a month level. And again, you don't get anything more, but maybe that's what you value it at. You give your fans the ability to value your work. And yes, most are going to choose the cheaper option. So we recommend setting a floor that's at least above $3 or so a month to $5 a month. Like that's a good floor, but you might not know where your ceiling is. You don't have to know, because what's the worst thing that happens? If you set up a $100 tier, takes you about a minute to copy and paste the same copy you had elsewhere. If a fan joins it, that's awesome. And if a fan doesn't join it, once again, you're not forcing them to. So that's my kind of mindset with it. I know it's really weird to think about, but like the benefit of subscriptions is that tiers are different levels that allow your fans to support you there. And you don't have to choose that. You can instead utilize this pricing strategy to like take the stress off of you of figuring out how much your work is worth. No, let your fans decide. They know better than you.
I really like that, and I'll decide subsequently if I cut this part of our conversation out. But I use Patreon for people to contribute to the podcast. And I have always struggled with the fact that setting up tiers where there are separate offerings, separate bonuses for different levels means you're holding back something from some follower. And so early on, I was doing things like taking excerpts from interviews and making them subscriber only parts. And every time I did it, I felt bad because I thought, this is great information and I'm only making it available to a small percentage of the people who follow the podcast. I'm going to have to think about this a lot, because when I support people on Patreon, that's why I do it. I'm doing it because I want to acknowledge their work, not because I want to get a t-shirt. So yeah, a very interesting perspective. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
So I wanted to ask you one final question. And
sure.
that is that I think, as we mentioned, you're a student at Harvard. And I was thinking about that in the context of my own business experience. I feel like a lot of the advantage I brought to my work as a full-time author was because I spent several decades in the corporate world as a project manager. So I know about risk management and team management and schedule management, all those things you learn as a project manager. So I had actually excerpted a little quote that I had gotten from you online to illustrate how business savvy you are, but now I don't have to use it because you've illustrated that very effectively in your conversation. But I imagine that a lot of people are in that situation where they don't have years and years and years of experience in the business world, and yet they want to make a career for themselves as a professional career author. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about advice you would offer as someone who hasn't spent decades and decades, not only not in the business world, but, hardly not in the world at all. How do you find the insights that you have in order to pave the way to a successful business?
Okay, that's a great question. I mean, I can only tell you what works for me, and that's that. Hopefully, people find what works for them, and maybe I help some people listening. But I definitely don't think this will work for everyone. That's just my prelude.
Your
But
caveat, yeah.
yeah, my caveat, of course. For me, I am a very obsessive person. So I like hyper focus on something and nothing else matters but like learning. And I'm very curious. So I want to learn every single thing about it. So for me, like honestly, since 15, I've been obsessed about one thing, which is like figuring out how storytellers can make a living online. Specifically, it was me for the longest. I wanted to help myself. And then eventually turned into this thing where I'm like, oh, wait, there's this interesting opportunity here to like, if I want to build a new way for me to make a living online, then like, why am I only doing it for me? Right. There's obviously an opportunity to all do this together. So that's still been the core thing, like storytelling, community building, and hopefully like making a living from our work and contributing positively to the world. So that's been like my hyper focus for a very long time. I don't study business in college. In fact, at my school, you can't study business as an undergrad. It's very liberal arts focused. So I've taken like maybe like two classes you could consider business oriented, but they're not actually business oriented. So I have zero formal business education, which sounds like, like, oh, wow, like, and he's a CEO of a platform I might consider joining. But here's the thing. I read a lot. I read probably 2 or 3 books a week. And that is what I credit to me being able to learn a lot. But that helps me the most. I run a podcast where I talk to top authors. And I also have a ton of friends who run startups, who run big companies, and I talk to them constantly for advice. I have mentorship everywhere. So I think if I'm an author, like how do I speed track what I'm doing? Like, because my game's a little bit different than the game you're playing now. Like I'm obviously trying to build a platform for authors, which is awesome. Like I have a lot of insights I can teach you. Hopefully learn a bit today. But at the same time, you probably won't follow my exact playbook of talking to like people who are running technology startups. They probably won't help you as much. But who will help you is other authors. So I'd recommend doing three things. My learning playbook is one, like play to your strengths. Like for me, I love business. Like it's my favorite thing. So if that's not your favorite thing, like lean into what is your favorite thing because ultimately in this world, storytelling is going to be the biggest thing. So if you're like if craft is your thing, like please lean into that because yes, you need some business knowledge, but it's 80-20, right? Like if you're really good at the business side of things, lean into that. If you're really good at the craft side of things, like that's actually more important. But then the second thing is build a community around you. Don't go at it alone. Like make it like a multiplayer game of you succeeding as an author. Because the biggest mistake I made in my first couple of years, and it's why I've learned more in the last probably 2 years than I did 10x in my first 3 years, is because I was going at it completely alone. So I would make a mistake and I'd be like, oh, I'm embarrassed. I did this wrong again. This ad strategy didn't work. This book release flopped. What am I going to do? And I go back to the drawing board myself alone, disappointed, lurking in the Facebook groups and being like, oh God, this person's succeeding again. Like happy for them, but not me. Right. And there'd be all this guilt. And I wish I had felt confident enough and had felt self-worth enough to be like, you know what? Just because I'm not selling, X number a month doesn't mean that I can't talk to another author. I know someone out here feeling that. Feels like I can be part of the community when I hit X because I'll be valuable enough. No, 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 no. If you reached out now and started to make author friends, all of a sudden now, when you make a mistake, you have people to go to who can help you. And when they make a mistake, they can do the same thing with you. You're now learning 5 times faster if you have 5 people who are sharing that. That is just it's so huge because then you're not at it alone anymore. And then magically, like that person, that friend, they might be super obsessed with more of like the community building side, like I am. And then that friend's super obsessed with like plot. And then this one's super obsessed with character. And you could all trade insights, right? Without needing to like, spend like any money. Like you're just being friends. Like that is like to me, like the answer. But then obviously, like I'm an author, I love reading. I think reading is really valuable. And I think that like almost everything you could ever learn is inside of a book. So like if you want to learn how to be a better writer, read great books. Like we know that. But if you want to learn business, like read books from people who can teach you about the business side of things. Specifically, like I'm gonna go through and recommend 5 books right now. I don't know these authors personally. I just like the books and I think they've helped me a lot. So The Story Paradox is one. Loved that book. Changed my life. The Business of Belonging, incredible, incredible book. Could not recommend it more. Advantage by Joe Solari. It's very specific to the publishing market and very business focused. I think we're at 3. I promised 5. Um, let's see. The Long Game by Dory Clark. Ooh, awesome. Have to read that. It totally changed your mindset about what we have in publishing. And then the final one, I'm actually going to recommend too. I'm horrible. The Membership Economy by Robbie Kellerman Baxter. Great, great book talking about memberships. I was just talking about. And then Subscription Marketing by Ann Janzer, who's written nonfiction books for authors. This book isn't specific for authors, but it's really good. So yeah, I just then and then one more 7 because I just looked at the list. Fans First by Jesse Cole, unbelievable. It's one of the best books ever. All these books, like they're fun reads, they're pretty simple, and honestly, if you read them all, you will get so much about business, and you will have spent under $100, like buying those books. If you buy those books, you could probably get them even cheaper than that. You get them at a library. So
Yeah.
anyways, that's my advice. Read those books and like talk to friends and make friends if you don't have them already. And my biggest mistake was not making those friends.
Well, that is fantastic. I will include links to all those books in the show notes so that people can easily access them. And Michael, this has been so insightful. I appreciate so much you spending time talking about not only Ream, but just the author business in general. Please let the listeners and viewers know where they can go to find out more about you and Ream and everything you do online.
Sure. I mean, the first place talking about education I would go is subscriptionsforauthors.com or our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/group/subscriptionsforauthors. We put a lot of education there to help authors specifically learning about subscriptions. So if you were like today, like, oh, this is interesting, but I don't know where to start there. In fact, if you sign up for a mailing list, we'll send you a free book about subscriptions. So that's a great place to start. And then if you want to look into Ream, reamstories.com is a great place to go for that. And you can create a free account and check out the site and see if it's a platform that'll work for you to run your subscription. But I do really recommend starting with like our community, making friends with our authors and learning about this subscription business model and really seeing if it's right for you. Of course, you can check out the platform too. I would be honored. But I think that like everyone can walk away having taken something valuable from our learnings to their publishing business, whether they have a subscription or not. And for the folks who obviously want to start one, you can definitely check out Reams.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.